Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. Thy choicest gifts in store, on him be pleased to pour. And that's all I'm going to say about that because I've got no rhythm. Today I'm going to do a Friday Reads. Had a really jam-packed reading week with some good stuff, some spectacular stuff, a couple of middling disappointments. So let me take you through that. So started with, and crucially, I think for this week, three of the books that I read were frontlist, real sort of recent 2022 or at least a 2021 release in the UK and a 2022 release in America for one of the books. So I tend to mix up much more and read sort of more backlist or crime stuff or other stuff in between. So the fact that I've read three relatively recent books in 1 week is a big thing for me. So the first one that I read was a book that was on a lot of people's anticipated reads for the year, based on the last novel by this author, which I didn't love, but I bought this one. And I'll tell you about it. So the author I'm talking about is Mohsin Hamid, who I first encountered with The Reluctant Fundamentalist. You can see this has got, this is a hardback which I bought. This must be in Barnes & Noble. In 2008, I bought this where it was on sale for £3.98. So it was a novel that I knew had been out, had missed the first time, but couldn't resist it picking up at $4 in an unread hardback. The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which I kind of liked, and it's interesting and well written. It just was sort of middling for me. And then his next novel, and it wasn't his next novel, sorry, there's How to Get Filthy Rich in Asia, which I haven't read. Then I think the novel after that was East West, which got a lot of play. This is like 2017. I've got the September 2017. And this was a big book of that. This is before I was on BookTube. But this was a big book that year and was on a lot of people's best books of the year. And it never really landed with me. It's got sort of magic realist parts to it. It's about migration and about moving, and the whole thing about people move across the world, but they just open a door and they come through the other side and they're in another country somewhere else. So it's about economic migration, and it's about the way humans move across the world and how they fit into the places that they arrive at. It got a lot of play, and I just felt a little dry to me, and I never really bought into the whole thing, but some people were big fans of this. So when his new book was announced this year, it wasn't necessarily the first thing that leapt to mind, but I had this money from work to spend on books. So as one of the new releases of 2022, I paid up and bought The Last White Man by Mohsin Hamid. Interesting size. It's one of these. So that was East West, and this is The Last White Man. So it's just a sort of little smaller version. Mind you, no, this is a UK hardback and this is a US hardback. Short book, novella sized almost. What is this? Under 200 pages, 170 pages. And it was again, okay, so what's the story of The Last White Man? So the first line, I should mention. The first line, because the first line will immediately resonate for those people who recognize this. It starts, one morning, Anders, a white man, woke up to find he had turned a deep and undeniable brown. Deliberate echoes of Kafka's Metamorphosis, where Gregor Samsa wakes up and finds that he's turned into, translated as vermin, cockroach, beetle, whatever it is. It's never specified. Kafka never actually specifies what kind of creature Samsa's metamorphed into. And this is playing off that. A white man wakes up and finds he has turned an undeniable brown. And then so I guess it's clearly looking at race and what it means, and he goes out and had the perceptions of him and what to do, and how does he explain it and what's actually happening, and it's never clear how this has happened or what's happened, but he doesn't look like himself, and he has to explain to his sort of on-off girlfriend, who is both repulsed but then by the change, is not necessarily the brownness, but then kind of attracted, and a flame is reignited to his father, who is a bit of a finds the whole thing a bit odd and not necessarily an out-and-out racist, but is a little problematic. But then before it gets too deep into any of this and what these repercussions are, it turns out that this is happening to other people, and then other people, and then eventually everybody. So including Anders' girlfriend, Una, who initially they have they reignite the spark and become something. Una's mother is a bit of a holdout. She is more overtly racist, but then it starts happening to everybody. The Last White Man is a bit of it's a bit of misdirection, and the thing plays out, as I say, in under 170 pages without actually getting too deep into anything. Like, I wasn't sure, does he want us to come away from this thinking racism? Well, that's bad. It was a little trite, but well written enough. Just was no depth here for me. In and out 170 pages without really leaving a mark. That's The Last White Man by Mohsin Hamid. After that, as is my wont, I picked up a graphic collection, comic novel. This was Garth Ennis, who is a favourite writer of mine. You will know him from writing Preacher, which was made into a TV series, writing The Boys, which was a 60-issue comic book. I've got 12 volumes of The Boys there in the back room. And there's also now is an ongoing successful TV series. I think they've just, series 3 came out this year, which I have yet to catch up with. He's known for being transgressive, violent, sexual, all sorts of things. And pretty funny as well, sort of dark-hearted. But there's a humour that usually runs through his work that I find appealing. So I try to pick up Garth Ennis when I can, and this was something he wrote for Aftershock Comics. So that is a sort of a non-brand, that's off-brand comic books, so not Marvel, not DC, not Image, not Dynamite, which he wrote The Boys for. Aftershock is yet another comic company that I'm not necessarily familiar with and wouldn't look up their stuff particularly. And there's a series called A Walk Through Hell, and I found this on eBay and thought, I'll always try something that I don't know anything about. So I go into this completely blind. I've got no idea what it's about. And the clue is in the title of Walk Through Hell. So this is the first 5 issues of what turned out to be a 12-issue series. Only 12 issues, and then it's done. So we told the whole story. Didn't get cancelled. The whole story was planned to run across 12 issues, and you get to the end of it. And it's grim as F, unpleasant, and it's all about hell, I guess. And I read these 5 issues and got done and was pleased that there's some intrigue there and lots of backstory and flashbacks, and then horrible things happen to not necessarily horrible people, and then there are some really horrible people and not terrible things happen to them, and it's just sort of amoral, not trash exactly, but just wasn't very satisfying. I went afterwards online and read the last 7 issues to stop me having to buy them in other form, just to see what happened, and pretty much played out as expected, and not great. So not my favourite Garth Ennis, sort of humorless as well. So really not what I'm looking for from Garth Ennis. But that was A Walk Through Hell. This is volume 1, called The Warehouse, because that's where this all takes place, in this warehouse. After that, I had another disappointing book. This is a book that I was excited to read because I'd had great recommendation. This is Aftermath by Preti Taneja. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. I think it's Preti, because she talks about, this is essay, this is non-fiction, but she talks about how her name is the same as Preti Patel, who is just the outgoing foreign minister. What was Preti Patel's role in the UK? I don't remember, but she was the one responsible for suggesting that immigrants should be sent off to Rwanda from the UK. Deeply unpleasant. Anyway, this is a set of essays based on a particular event that took place back in 2019, November 2019, where a former convict, so a man who'd been in prison for 8 years, who'd been released for a couple of years, made his way to an event in London. And the event was in honour of a programme that goes into prisons and runs creative writing classes for prisoners, and sometimes brings students from universities to sit and work on creative writing projects with prisoners. And as I say, this event was all about that, and about the people who organise it and the people who run such an event. And this gentleman, who had been in prison and attended some of these courses, came. He attached to himself a fake bomb belt, strapped knives to his hands, and murdered 2 people at the event, and tried to kill others. He was subsequently chased out of the building onto London Bridge, I believe, and was eventually killed rather than captured. The whole thing is absolutely shocking. Preti Taneja had been a teacher in some of these creative writing courses in prison. She was not there on that day, although she knew the people, and particularly one of the gentlemen who was one of the guys who was murdered. She knew very well, and I should name them rather than the murderer. I want to give credit to the two. One second, let me pause because I want to get this right. The two people that were murdered were Saskia Jones and Jack Merritt. And Jack Merritt was somebody who Preti Taneja knew well. So this is a devastating occurrence for her. Would have been devastating anyway. And it is a shocking. So the book then examines whether there is any value in having art in prison. Is there such a thing as rehabilitation? Should civilians be putting their lives at danger by working with convicted criminals and trying to help rehabilitate them? Is there such a thing? This man had served time in prison. He was on people's radar for having some extremist views. He had written stuff that seemed pretty extreme. It turned out later during the in the aftermath of this. The book is called Aftermath. In the inquiry that takes place afterwards, it turns out that stuff material he'd written about wanting to murder people. It was, this had been seen by people in the anti-terrorism task force who'd said, "Oh, that is his outlet. He's written this, and we don't think he's a danger." And then he went on to commit this heinous act of terror or murder or however you want to describe it. And so it's kind of indictment of the prison system, but then also talks about how people get radicalized in Britain, and that's before he went to prison, and the schools really failed him, and he dropped out. This man had dropped out of school sort of at 15, 16, and no one really paid attention, and that's how he ended up in prison the first time, age 20. And by the time he's out at 28, what had happened to him in prison? Was he more radicalized? Had he changed? Had he been in any way impacted by his time in prison? And then he comes out and commits this horrible murder. Also within this, there are some just super weird tangents. So at one point, she goes off on a whole thing about a Margaret Atwood's book, Hagseed, where Margaret Atwood was one of a number of authors who were chosen by the Hogarth Press to do a retelling of Shakespeare's plays. And Hagseed is a retelling of The Tempest. But it's a novel. And in the book, I think that there is... it's set in a prison or something similar where they're trying to get people to tell the story or act in, I don't remember what exactly, in The Tempest. And again, so Atwood is dealing with the juxtaposition of art and criminals and and there's a whole story that it's a novel which I've read. I've bought Hagseed back there and I don't remember it very clearly. But she goes into great detail here, ripping it into us, and why didn't Atwood understand this? It's very unclear to me what her intentions were writing this, and it's all a bit muddled. Unclear whether she's in favour of imprisoning people who have committed or likely to commit acts of terror, whether she's blaming Britain for not finding a place for people, whether she's blaming the prison system for not successfully rehabilitating people, whether she's blaming criminals for being criminals. It was clearly written from the heart, clearly written by someone who cared deeply and was affected deeply, but it just was a bit of a muddle for me. So didn't love that. Also, I guess one of the things that put me off halfway through was she talks about Tayari Jones' book, An American Marriage, which I thought was absolute tripe. Fans of Tayari Jones, An American Marriage, and praises that about telling the story about the prison industrial complex of America and a man who's wrongly imprisoned, and it was just a terrible, soapy, trashy story that got a lot of praise and a lot of buzz at the time. And she's a fan of that and hates the Atwood, and there was just some literary stuff which just seemed odd juxtaposition with the main treatise, which wasn't entirely clear about how she feels about prison. Okay, then went back and read another comic book, and this was volume 5 of John Allison's Giant Days, all set in a British university, 3 roommates who are just hilarious, and if you like comic books, if you this is not superhero stuff, these are very stylized three girls. This is taking them to the end of their freshman year at university in the UK, in some red brick provincial university, and they've been living together, and there's a soapy story of the boyfriends and the roommates and the troubles, and it's very stylized and sort of hyper, it gets very silly. So it's not necessarily to be taken on at face value, but it's fun. And so they come to the end of their first year, and then they go off to a music festival. That's a really fun episode. And then they just the last chapter in this, they start their second year at university. I'm loving these. I pick them up when I can. This interestingly, I must have bought secondhand because it was withdrawn from the library collection. It was part of a secondhand sale authorized by the Arapahoe Library District. I have no idea where the Arapahoe Library District is. I'm assuming it's somewhere in the US. But thank you to the Arapahoe Library District for withdrawing this and arranging it to be sold, and for me picking up. That was that. Great fun. And then the last book that I want to talk about today, it was an absolute winner for me, and I'm so excited because I was worried that it might not be. So last year, was it last year? Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I bought this in September 2017. Pond by Claire-Louise Bennett was a collection of sort of connected short stories that was just mind expanding and wonderful, and just this set me on fire. I think this might have been the first Fitzcarraldo book I bought, and I love this, and I've pressed this on to as many people as I can. I think it requires you to be switched on when you're reading it, because it's smart and light on its feet, but very, very brilliant. I love Pond. And so when I heard that Claire-Louise Bennett had written a novel that was, I say, interconnected short stories, but it wasn't quite clear if it was interconnected short stories. Were they connected? Was it the same person, or was it? Didn't matter. It just had this amazing aggregative sense of wonder and beauty that I loved Pond. So I was nervous about reading a novel by Claire-Louise Bennett, and I put it off initially. I didn't rush to get it, and then again, I said I had this money to spend, so I thought I'd pick it up. This is the American hardback, so it came out in hardback in the UK about a year ago already, and only published in hardback in the US, I think April of 2022, and is now available in paperback in the UK. And I just bloody loved this. It's, on the one hand, it does some of the things that I don't enjoy, which is long pages without paragraph breaks, but everything that I hated about Duck's bloody Newbury bloody port, and the fact it kept repeating the fact that, and this stream of consciousness thing that drove me nuts. This is how to do it right. This is just exquisite. It's a book about books. It's a book about readers. It's a book about writers. And if you are any of those things, and I'm guessing if you're watching this channel, you're probably somebody who reads. If you are a reader, if you value what you've got throughout your life from childhood to where you are now as a reader, if you have moments that have stayed with you that are often impossible to explain to anybody else, what joy you get from reading a book, from remembering what it was like when you read the book, from cherishing seeing that book on the shelf, seeing it on someone else's shelf, bumping into it, coming across the name of somebody who was in the book that you loved when you read when you were 16 years old, understanding that the way a book impacted you when you read it for the first time when you were 16 would not be the same if you read it for the first time when you were 53. But still, that experience as a 16-year-old stays with you, and as a 53-year-old you still have that joy and that memory of that reading and that experience. It's just about the joy of books. It's a book about books, and who doesn't love? I challenge anyone watching this to say they don't love a book about books. She talks about many books. So if you're a reader, there'll be several books that she talks about that you have read and loved. One of the things she goes deep into which is a book that has a special place in my reading life, is Ian Forster's A Room with a View. And she sees herself, I think she reads the book for the first time when she's 16, the character, the narrator of this story, who may or may not be Claire-Louise Bennett, but certainly the narrator of the story we meet the first time as a young child, and we follow her through her life and her different relationships and experiences. And one of the things she revisits time and again is Lucy Honeychurch in Italy, and her experience and her relationships and how it plays out. And I won't spoil any of that for you. I think I saw the film first before I read the book of A Room with a View, but it is a special resonance for me and for my wife, and it's a special book for the two of us, which is rare, but true. And maybe one day I'll talk about that a bit. But it's key to this, and so my enjoyment was enhanced because I knew the book and I knew the story and I remembered that. But she talks about other books as well. She's blurbed on the back of it, but if you're going to get blurbed by authors, you can't do much better than having Karl Ove Knausgaard and Roddy Doyle, and then Claire V. Watkins in the middle. I only read Battleborn. I haven't read subsequent novels, but I do love that one. Woke up this morning. I love the title. I woke up this morning and chose violence, or whatever, something like that. I'd like to get to that, but Battleborn was a good collection, even though I don't think she's so fond of it. But Karl Ove Knausgaard and Roddy Doyle, two authors that I have read extensively and love. So that fact that they are blurbing Claire-Louise Bennett. Just an outstanding book. There's a whole middle section where the narrator tells a story about a character she invented and his life and this weird parable story about his life in is it Vienna or is it Venice? That's something. Sometimes he was in Venice, sometimes he was in Vienna, depending on how she was writing the story. And the character's name is Tarquin Superbus, or as it reads, Tarquin Superbus. And he's supposed to be a ridiculous character, and the story about him is weird and wonderful and runs over several chapters, and then it's because it's about her telling the story, and it's remembering a story that she told, which actually she no longer has the original manuscript, so she's telling a story about a story that she told about a character who is in a story. It layers within layers, and it just unpacks beautifully and reads like a dream, and it just poetry on the page. Maybe I've overpraised it, I'm sorry. Check out 19, fulfilled every possible hope I could have had for Claire-Louise Bennett. Any anticipation, any nervous anticipation I may have had about her ability to carry off a novel after that wonderful collection of stories dissipated very early on, and just this read to me like a dream. It was a book about books for readers, and as a reader of books, it was a joy. And that's all. Wow. Sorry. God bless. Have a good weekend, and carry on reading. Bye.